Hi there, Robert Rotenberg here. We're posting a video for my book 3 in my Monday night chapter sessions. It's called Stray Bullets. The session was a lot of fun, and there's a great tip in there for you about not using too many adverbs. Enjoy. First, I want to start by talking a little bit about what's going on in the world right now. So I've got something I want to read to you. Back in the 1960s, in the southern United States, there was a man who was continually arrested for breaking the law and getting thrown in jail. In the United States, unlike here in Canada, bail is almost always based on money, how much you have. And if the authorities want to detain you, they set a very high bail. And this man, this lawbreaker, didn't have a lot of money. Fortunately, he knew an entertainer in Hollywood who was sympathetic to his cause. Each time the man was arrested and had to make bail, he'd tell his colleagues to call the entertainer in Los Angeles. The actual words he used were, "Call Sammy." Sammy was Sammy Davis Jr. And the man's name, the perpetual lawbreaker, was Martin Luther King. It's a trick when you're storytelling to start with an anecdote, and I think this one is extremely relevant right now. Yesterday, at the suggestion of my daughter Helen, who helps me with these broadcasts, and to raise funds for bail for protesters in the United States, I made a donation to the Minnesota Bail Relief Fund. Now, we can all spend countless hours debating about the causes of the horror we are seeing now in the United States, the actions of the protesters, the police, even the wording of the term Black Lives Matter. But to me, that's not the point. In fact, I think debate, a healthy debate, is exactly what we need. It's a hard debate, and it should be. We need to talk. What is unhealthy is standing by and doing nothing. What is unhealthy is silence. So I'm not here to lecture anyone on what to do, but I think it's vital to acknowledge what is going on. The bad, which is self-evident from what we see on TV, and the good, the police officers and protesters hugging, kneeling, marching together. Major US corporations no longer staying silent, but supporting Black Lives Matter. And most of all, and most encouraging of all, the young people of every background who are getting involved. So I want to thank Helen for this, and I'd like to encourage everyone or anyone who wants to make a donation. Helen is posting a link to an all-encompassing resource for not only places to donate, but petitions to sign, offices to call, and countless ways you can help. I would also encourage you to keep this link and share with anyone who says, what can I do? Because there's a lot we can do right now. And thanks for letting me start this way. So in such a politically charged time, it's probably a good segue to the third novel I wrote, which is called Stray Bullets. The first novel I wrote, Old City Hall, was really just about the city as I saw it. The second novel, The Guilty Plea, was about third generation failed families and about the grocery store business, which fascinates me in Ontario. But this book really came out of tragic events in the city. And those of you from Toronto will probably remember the horrible, what was called the Boxing Day shooting of Jane Kriba. I see Wendy, I see people nodding their heads. It's going to shock you when I tell you that it was in 2005. It seemed like just yesterday. And for those who don't know or who aren't from Toronto, this happened on Boxing Day, which is a big shopping day in Canada. A young woman named Jane Kriba was struck by a bullet when two gangs were shooting on Yonge Street and tragically killed. The case was very close to me. I literally worked steps from where that happened. I knew the prosecutor, I knew the defense lawyer, I knew the police officer involved very well because we'd spent about a year together working on a trial, a murder trial. When I say together, when you're the defense lawyer, you still work with the other side and the judge. And I think it was a seminal moment in Toronto. It kind of was maturing at a very hard moment. It was the loss of innocence moment for the city. So I decided I would want to write this book. And I spent about a year starting the book because I want to talk about starting a book. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. It's a very long chapter. I'm just going to read the first part. And any of you who've read the book may recall in chapter 4, there's a character named Nancy Parrish, and she gets a phone call. She's a criminal lawyer. She's about to go to Mexico to meet her boyfriend, and then she gets this phone call from her old client saying he's on the run. And what's she going to do? Is she going to go to Mexico to see her new boyfriend, or is she going to stay and do the right thing? Of course, we know the moral choice she's going to make. So I spent a long time, and in fact, I went to my old archives in July 2010, and it was chapter 1. And I put Parrish gets the call. Now, what I do for each chapter is I write the name of the character whose voice it's in, where this happened. I didn't bother this time. And main thing is what happened. Well, after about a year, I was thinking, the problem is I'm going to have to recreate for the reader everything that happened. Now, in the first 2 books we've done the first chapters of, you see there's people coming on a murder that's already happened. But for this book, I realized I had to start right at the action. So in this book, unlike the others, I actually bring the reader right into the action. So this is, I went back to my archives and I found, this is dated May 2010, but in fact, this is, oh, I picked up the wrong one. So this was in May. And so here I am a year later, still worrying about this. And I finally realized I had to start earlier. So this is the actual first draft I ever wrote of the first chapter. And you can see, actually, I still say Parrish gets the call, but it's not Parrish. So I'm just going to read a few paragraphs of this. And then I'm going to read you what I actually put in the book, years, months and months and many revisions later. So chapter 1 of the first draft. It was bad enough being paid minimum wage, but having to wear a hairnet was even worse, especially since the back, excuse me, let me slow down. It was bad enough getting paid minimum wage, but having to wear a hairnet was even worse, especially since the back of the kitchen where Arturo Di Carlo worked was so hot. And his Tim Hortons uniform was at least a full size too small, made him look ridiculous, made it hard to talk to the young waitress, Suzanne, who was very friendly, very cute. Not that she'd ever be interested in a legal immigrant who had to keep his head down to make sure the cops didn't get a hold of him. So remember when I talked about the first chapter, are you in, first paragraph, are you in or you out? Well, frankly, this would not have brought me in. And just for you who are writers, you can see I put a little note, star election campaign, because I thought maybe there was an election campaign going on at the time. I'm trying to figure out what's happening. Let's continue. Susanna liked to talk to him though. On her breaks, he'd sneak her a donut from the baking tray and she'd sneak him a coffee from up front. And they'd sit out back on a few crates. Tonight, on their last break, she'd been real upset. It's my old boyfriend, Dewey. He got out of jail just 2 weeks ago and no one's seen him. So what's the problem, Arturo asked. He rolled his own cigarette and passed it to her. I'm going out with the new guy, Andrew. They grew up together on Pelee Island. It's down on Lake Erie, and I know they hate each other. Well, since I wrote it, I can say, since I wrote this, I can say it's not very good. In fact, it's quite terrible. Why is it bad? Screenwriters talk about something called being on the nose with dialogue. And I'm going to say a phrase that I'm going to say over and over and over again. Dialogue is not narrative. The problem is trying to use the dialogue between two people to tell the story. That's not how the real world works. So many, many, many revisions later, this is what I wrote. And I'm going to read about a page and a half. Okay, chapter 1. It was bad enough working the kitchen of a donut shop for minimum wage, but having to wear a hairnet was even worse, especially since the Tim Hortons uniform they made Jose Sanchez wear was at least a full size too big, made him look ridiculous, made it hard to talk to Suzanne, the pretty young server who worked out front. Not that it mattered, she had a boyfriend, a punk named Jet. And why would she be interested in an illegal immigrant to Canada? His real name wasn't Jose Sanchez, but Dragomir Ozera. and who wasn't a chef from Portugal, as he told his employer, but was a Romanian linguistics student with a warrant out for his arrest. Fucking hairnet. Now, remember when I was talking originally about how you have to create the character, you have to care about the character. I can tell you, whenever I go to high school and read this, everyone laughs at fucking hairnet. But the point is to take your time to establish the character. Suzanne and Ozero liked to hang out together on their breaks. He'd sneak her a donut from the baking tree. She'd snag him a coffee. Remember in the first draft, I used sneak twice as a verb? She'd snag him a coffee, and they'd head out back for a smoke. This afternoon, it was almost 5 o'clock, and the mid-November sky was already losing its light. Suzanne was sitting in her usual spot on one of the overturned milk crates with a pack of Players in her hand. He bent down to take a cigarette and took 3 tries to light the bloody thing. The wind was strong and chilling. Remember my basic thing I was always talking about? Character, setting, and then action. He stood up and took a deep puff, inhaled into the scant light. Then he saw it. Shit, he said. What? She asked, looking around. Now, you're a reader. The book is called Stray Bullets. I haven't put these characters here for nothing. You know something is going to happen. But the point is, remember we were talking about building suspense? Don't just go to the suspense. You want to hold back the suspense. So maybe you think something terrible is going to be seen? What? She asked, looking around. It's snowing. I can't believe it. A little bit of backstory. 6 years ago, when Ozero first arrived in Toronto from Romania, he was excited about the idea of experiencing a real Canadian winter. But now, all he could think was November 14th, December 14th, January 14th, February 14th, March 14th. Somehow he had to get through all these months of ice and snow. I guess winters aren't like this in Portugal, she said. I never saw snow once before I came here, he said. Of course, he'd been born in the mountains of Romania and was in fact an excellent skier. These days he was having fun, pretending to be Portuguese, and he'd even grown long sideburns to fit the part. His last job, he was Argentinian, complete with a long, twisty mustache. Luckily, his facial hair grew real fast. So just enough backstory to give you a sense that he's a character, get a sense of who he is. She handed him the coffee, and he took a sip. He winced. At Timmy's, they served something called a double-double, watery coffee with 2 creams and 2 sugars. He didn't have the heart to tell her how horrid it tasted. Who in the world would put cream in anything you'd want to drink, he thought, as he struggled to keep the coffee down. She reached for a cigarette and took a long drag. Her shift was over. She was waiting for Jet, who always picked her up at 5 in his big old Cadillac. Guy was never late. She seemed fidgety. What's up? So now we're a page and a half into it, and the dialogue, instead of coming at you, hitting you on the nose as screenwriters come, it comes out of the action. It comes out of the character. What's up, he asked. It's my ex, Dewey. Got out of jail 3 days ago, and I hear he's looking for me. She twirled her long, curly hair between her fingers. So that's all I'm going to read from this right now. But I want to show you the progression that I made from the original to that. Now, I'm going to read one more thing to you today, because as you all know, I love teaching, and I have a lot of students, and a young writer has allowed me to read the opening of a story that this writer wrote. And I think you'll hear as I go through it and critique it, you can see some of these principles that I'm talking about. It's called Lunch, actually, and it's a short story. Oh, I forgot something. When I'm trying to figure out the plot of a novel, I thought I'd show you this. I was going through my archives. I usually put them up on a big poster. And you can see right here, I'm saying part 1, and you can see I changed the name. And then you can see down here, Parrish gets the call. I thought you might pick up. Okay, so let's get to the short story. We're almost done. So this is a short story, and here it goes. Tommy, just put it in your lap, please. Now, it's very, very hard to start with dialogue. In fact, I've never started a book with dialogue. The dialogue, again, has to come out of the action. And I think this is pretty good because it's already kind of established two characters, something, even the name Tommy. She was addressing the young boy across the table from her. Tommy had folded the napkin on his head. He was trying it on, just as he was trying his smile on the old woman at the table across the aisle. Tom, please, she said. Now it's getting a bit confusing because the writer hasn't really introduced the characters. Who's she? Who's the person across the aisle? Who's speaking? He finally looked at the young lady across the table from him. Slowly bending his head forward, Tom let his linen crown fall into his lap. He didn't look down. Sorry about that. Let me go back a little bit. Tom took the menu from him. That was the waiter. He opened it, balancing it on the edge of the table. It was so large that he had to put it down before he could see. Why do we always come here? He said to the menu across from him. The waiter came back to pour the water. Mommy, why? Tommy's voice was louder and harsher. Now, this is a really, really important point. And I see this with a lot of writers, some of you who've worked with me, is the writer's trying to play this trick, kind of hold back that it's a young boy and his mother by identifying as the woman across, the menu across. It's not necessary. It takes away from letting the reader know exactly where they are. But something here does work. Dialogue isn't always someone say, hi, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? And so the fact that the mother doesn't answer him and that he has to provoke her, I think works. She lowered her menu and without looking at him, inquired, what you want, dear? And again, the fact that she's not answering his question tells you something about their relationship. He looked at her. She was reaching for a cigarette. He watched her unravel the silver paper. Good. I'll have the soup, he said slowly, without looking up. And the salad to start, and the salmon. Now at that point, you want to know he's talking to the waiter. The waiter's still there. It's not here. Fine, the waiter said, turning towards his mother. Is it good today? Tommy asked. Today? Yes, the salmon is very good today. And I'll have Caesar salad dressing on my salad, Tommy replied. You forgot to ask me that. Well, the person who said I could use this story is me, because I wrote this when I was in third year U of T, which was years ago. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to go back and to see how I started my writing career and the things that I was doing that were working and the mistakes that I was making, which, as you can see in the first draft I did of Stray Bullets, I'm still making. So there we go. I want to let you know, Helen's been great. We've updated the website. So now the first and the second session, or whatever we call these, are there, plus my little cheat sheet. I'll be getting back to you with the cheat sheet. I'll be putting up the third one. It's robertrotenberg.com. A lot of you have been writing to me, and I really appreciate it. I haven't had time to get back to everyone, but keep those cards and letters coming, and I'll keep responding. So remember, dialogue is not narrative. Helen, can you unmute it? Can you unmute it for everyone? Can I say repeat after me? Dialogue is not narrative.
Yes. So if you would like to repeat, you can press unmute and repeat after him.
Okay, we don't have to do that.
I don't have the power to unmute.
Okay. Anyhow, thanks a lot. Anyone who wants to stick around, why don't we unmute and see if there's some questions, or you can just send Helen questions
in the chat or in the comments on Facebook.
Okay. Do we have some questions?
Kathy says, does Bob offer classes? He mentions tools often shared with participants who take writing classes.
Well, it's funny you say that, because Candidly, I find this format fun but frustrating because as you can see, I'd love to go into great detail. So I was just thinking today, I was walking back, I was thinking if enough people want me to, I'd have to start charging for it, and I don't want to charge this. But let's talk about this later. But I could possibly put together some classes. We could spend 4 weeks on dialogue, 4 weeks on characters, 4 weeks on structure, 4 weeks on backstory. I could talk about this stuff forever, as you know. I love doing it. So if you're interested, send me a note and we'll see if we can organize something.
Paul Dunn has a really good question I've never seen before.
Yeah.
He says, do you worry that a simile, metaphor, or sentence that you read in someone else's book will unintentionally appear in your book?
You know, I used the same simile in 2 books. In fact, I used it in this book. And yes, the simile is like a little piece of gold. I guess it's like, you know, it's like if you're wearing a cocktail dress, you don't want anyone else to be wearing it. So when you see a simile from someone else, sure, you think, oh, I wish I'd had that. And well, we could do 4 weeks on similes. The trick with similes is not only to avoid cliche, but the simile has to come out of the action. It has to be consistent with the characters and types of people that you're talking about. Got another question? Sorry if I talked too fast today. I was a bit nervous.
Wendy says, why do you use real instead of really? It sounds very American and very folksy. Is it worth it?
Where did I use real?
So I guess I'm not sure exactly where you used it, but I guess an example would be like, instead of it's really blue, you could say it's real blue.
Yeah. I want to give you a trick, which is when you finish whatever you write, word search the letters LY, LY, because those almost always are adverbs. And as Hemingway said, a good writer, an adverb is just an excuse for a bad verb. And I remember I saw a documentary on him once, and he bragged that he never used adverbs. So of course I grabbed some of his short stories, and yes, he does use adverbs. I only allow myself to have suddenly twice in every book. But just a very simple example is the way that I changed the verb the second time that when I rewrote it. Because in the first version, he'd sneak her a donut from the baking tray, and when I first wrote it, and I say, and she'd sneak him. So I changed that to she'd snag him a coffee. It's small things, but trust me, trust me, trust me. There are hours of work, and it's really what matters. It really makes a big difference. Another question?
We don't have any more right now. We're almost at the half-hour mark.
That's okay. Anyone else? Well, I hope I kept you entertained. Okay, thanks a lot. I'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to talk about my 4th book, Stranglehold, which was about this out of control mayor in the city of Toronto. And it came out 10 days before Rob Ford did his mea culpa. As you know, I've told you I finished my last book, and now I'm walking around the city trying to think, what will people be thinking about in the city 2 years from now? Because by the time you write a book and get it published, you have to somehow try to be prescient. Listen, I really appreciate it. I've had great support with this, and thanks a lot. And thank you, Helen.
Yeah. So I'm just going to repost that link. So I really, really would like to encourage everyone to click it, read up, educate yourself, inform yourself, and most importantly, do something to help. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night. I was really nervous there at the beginning. What do you think of that?
You're still.